It's Monday, the 4th of August. Look at that. We're already into the first week of August. Time is flying by, as they say. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. First up, thousands of hacked files from Russian servers are revealing evidence of there's no other way to put it, a heinous war crime, the organized abduction and deportation of Ukrainian children. We'll break down what was uncovered. Later in the show, Hamas is drawing a red line, refusing to give up its weapons unless a Palestinian state is formally established. Well, who couldn't see that coming as a result of some self-serving politicians calling for recognition of a Palestinian state? We'll examine the implications for ongoing negotiations. Plus, Iran says it's running out of water, and fast. With Tehran facing a major shortage, we'll break down what it could mean for the regime. And in today's Back of the Brief, the FBI arrests a California man accused of sending money to ISIS. We'll tell you what we know about the case and how authorities tracked him down. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. We're starting today with a major discovery by Ukraine's military intelligence. According to Ukraine's HUR, that's the main intelligence directorate, essentially their version of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, a recent cyber attack on Russian servers has uncovered what they're calling undeniable proof of one of Russia's most disturbing war crimes, the mass abduction of Ukrainian children. The hack targeted the servers of the Russian-installed administration in occupied Crimea. Ukrainian hackers spent several days inside the system and managed to get their hands on over 100 terabytes of sensitive data. And now, that data is revealing thousands of files documenting the organized and systematic deportation of children from the occupied regions of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. We're talking about detailed lists of the names of abducted children, personal profiles, illegal transfers of custody to Russian citizens, and relocation records showing exactly where many of these kids were ultimately resettled. Now, some of those documents have already been published by HUR, but the rest have been handed over to Ukrainian law enforcement for use in criminal prosecutions and, more importantly, in ongoing efforts to locate and return these children to their families. According to Ukraine's official Children of War database, nearly 20,000 children have been confirmed abducted since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in early 2022. But Ukrainian officials say the true number could be dramatically higher, possibly as many as 150,000 to 300,000. The Kremlin claims these transfers are, quote, rescue missions, meant to protect children from the war. But the files tell a different story. This isn't about safety, it's about forced assimilation, propaganda, and demographic engineering. Now, this issue of Ukraine's missing children isn't new. In fact, it's been at the center of war crimes accusations leveled against the Kremlin since early in the war. For over 2 years now, international investigators and human rights groups have tracked what appears to be a deliberate, state-organized effort to remove Ukrainian children from occupied territories and relocate them inside Russia, often stripping them of their identities and placing them with Russian families. And as shocking as it sounds, it's not a new tactic for Moscow. There's a rather dark historical precedent here. During the Soviet era, particularly under Stalin, the regime routinely used child displacement as a weapon of control. In the Baltic states, Poland, and parts of Eastern Europe, Soviet authorities deported entire families, often separating children from their parents and placing them into institutions or with Russian families. The goal of these abductions was to erase national identity. These children were renamed, banned from speaking their native languages, and re-educated under communist ideology. What we're seeing now in Ukraine is a revival of that old Soviet playbook. Only this time, in the age of digital records, the Kremlin may not be able to hide behind the fog of history. Back in March of last year, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued arrest warrants for Russian President Putin and other members of his government. The charges accuse them of unlawfully deporting and transferring children from occupied areas of Ukraine into the Russian Federation. And that is a violation, of course, of the Geneva Conventions and a recognized war crime under international law. According to the ICC, there are reasonable grounds to believe that Putin himself bears individual criminal responsibility, directly participating in the scheme and failing to exercise proper control over civilian and military subordinates. The move marked the first time that the court has issued a warrant for the leader of a permanent member of the UN Security Council. While Russia does not recognize the ICC's authority, the warrants have dramatically limited Putin's ability to travel internationally and has added fuel to ongoing investigations into Russia's broader conduct during the war. And this latest intelligence haul appears to provide even more damning evidence to support the charges against him. Ukraine has made the return of these abducted children a non-negotiable demand in any future peace talks. But according to President Zelensky, Russian officials have dismissed these calls as nothing more than a, quote, show for childless European old ladies, even while privately admitting that they have, in fact, relocated hundreds. This is what modern warfare essentially looks like under the Russian Federation. It's not just military operations, but the weaponization of children and families to inflict generational damage. And it's worth repeating that these are not unsubstantiated claims. These are files, names, locations, appointments of illegal guardians, evidence. It's a war crime. The question now is, will anybody be held accountable? All right, coming up next, Hamas draws a hard line on disarmament, and Iran is on the brink of a water crisis that could shake the regime. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here with a very solid fashion tip, because as you know, I'm known for my drip, as the kids say. Look, I want to tell you about a great company. It's called True Classic. Now, with True Classic, it's never just about the fit or the fabric. It's also about helping guys show up with confidence and purpose every day. Their clothes fit where they should. They feel incredible, and they don't cost a fortune. You get that tailored look without blowing your budget, and that's very important. True Classic's mission is uplifting men in their day-to-day lives, giving back to underserved communities, and doing it all without taking themselves too seriously. When you throw on True Classic clothing, you can feel the difference. It's tailored where you want it, relaxed where you need it. There's no bunching. Nobody needs bunching. There's no stiff fabric. You don't want that. There's no BS. It's just a clean, effortless fit that actually works for real life. Forget overpriced designer brands and skip the cheap throwaway stuff. True Classic is built for comfort, built to last, and built to give back. You can find them at Target, at Costco, or just head over to trueclassic.com/PDB. Welcome back to the PDB. Hamas has shut down hopes for a breakthrough in ceasefire negotiations, declaring it will not disarm unless a fully sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital is established. That announcement amounts to a flat-out rejection of one of Israel's core negotiation demands. The statement, issued over the weekend, served as a sharp rebuke to President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who suggested the Iran-backed terror group might be open to laying down its arms. Hamas dismissed that notion as a misrepresentation, reiterating what it called its right to, quote, resistance and its weapons unless statehood is achieved. As we've discussed on the PDB in recent days, pressure on Hamas has been mounting, not just from Israel, but from its Arab neighbors. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and the rest of the Arab League have ramped up calls for the terror group to relinquish its weapons and governance of Gaza. And yet, at the same time, France and the UK and Canada have bent to internal political pressures and called for the recognition of a Palestinian state, which, as could be expected, simply served to embolden Hamas. Now, for Israel, disarmament remains a non-starter in negotiations. An IDF lieutenant warned that military operations will continue unabated unless Hamas agrees to the release of the remaining 50 hostages, of which only 20 are believed to be still alive. That warning landed just hours before Hamas published a video of an emaciated male hostage inside of a Gaza tunnel. The disturbing footage sparked outrage across the Jewish state, with the hostage's family accusing Hamas of starvation and pleading with Israeli and U.S. leadership to intervene. Witkoff arrived in Israel last week for a series of meetings aimed at reviving the collapsed negotiations. His visit was marked by growing international scrutiny over the humanitarian crisis in the enclave, where UN agencies accused Jerusalem of engineering a man-made famine by obstructing aid. Though that's a charge Israel flatly denies, saying there are no limits on food supplies, placing blame squarely on Hamas for looting distribution points and diverting resources for sale to fund its war machine. On Saturday, Witkoff joined dozens of hostage families at a gathering in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square. It's a plaza that's become a flashpoint for demonstrations demanding faster government action. In a 2-hour meeting, he told families that Trump has lost confidence in Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's piecemeal approach to negotiations. According to Witkoff, quote, President Trump now believes that everybody ought to come home at once. No piecemeal deals. That doesn't work, end quote. The U.S. is now pushing for a, quote, all-or-nothing framework of total disarmament, full demilitarization of Gaza, and the return of all surviving hostages. Now, that's a significant pivot in direct reflection of growing frustration in Washington. While Trump initially supported Netanyahu's phased approach, Secretary of State Marco Rubio previewed the shift nearly 2 weeks ago, telling hostages' families it was time to explore a more comprehensive strategy. Witkoff also met with Netanyahu to discuss the collapse of the negotiation process. According to an Israeli official familiar with the talks, both sides agreed that Hamas's hardline stance of statehood has rendered incremental diplomacy a dead end. Still, mediators have yet to change course, calling for a deal that would encompass Hamas's disarmament, full demilitarization of Gaza, and simultaneous release of all hostages. One version under discussion includes a 60-day ceasefire, the release of 10 living hostages, and the handover of 18 deceased hostages. Witkoff reaffirmed that any lasting peace would require Hamas to disarm, pointing to growing calls across Arab capitals demanding precisely that. But that optimism was short-lived, as Hamas doubled down that disarmament will only come after full statehood. Okay, and turning to Hamas's puppet master, Iran. The regime is staring down an environmental catastrophe that could leave its capital without running water in a matter of weeks, risking an already brittle hold on public support. Speaking last week, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian sounded the alarm, pointing to a dangerous mix of crumbling infrastructure and unsustainable demand. He said, quote, if we cannot manage and people do not cooperate in controlling consumption, there won't be any water by September or October, end quote. The situation has grown so dire that CNN now describes the crisis as, quote, weeks away from a potential day zero, framing it as a litmus test for whether the Islamic Republic's leadership can govern a capital of more than 10 million people through an environmental collapse. This all comes after a 40% plunge in rainfall over the last 4 months, compounding the effects of a 5-year drought that's crippled reservoirs across the country. But experts say the problem runs far deeper than any subpar rainy season. Iran's Environmental Protection Organization points to decades of poor planning and chronic overuse, telling state media that, quote, numerous environmental problems like water stress are the result of neglecting sustainable development. Well, yeah, that and also diverting massive amounts of money over the years to fund their proxies and build their nuclear and missile programs. The numbers are staggering. In Tehran, 70% of residents exceed the daily recommended water limit of 130 liters, that's about 34 gallons, per person. Now, although that's half the amount of the U.S. daily average, it's still too much for a country whose water infrastructure is falling apart. Agriculture, however, remains the elephant in the room, guzzling up nearly 80% of the country's total water usage. Pezeshkian has dismissed popular short-term fixes, such as an extended midweek shutdown, calling it a, quote, cover-up and not a solution. And water isn't the only system under strain. According to the semi-official Tasnim news agency, which is aligned with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Iran is also buckling under pressure on its power grid and gas supplies. Blackouts and shortages are now routine during peak demand in the country's southern and western provinces, with entire communities left without basic utilities for hours, sometimes for days on end. Emergency conservation efforts are being rolled out, but rather than instilling confidence, they've only deepened the sense of concern. One regional outlet framed the measures as, quote, signs of panic, not planning, while Al Monitor warned of a, quote, perfect storm of water shortages and collapsing public trust. If this all sounds familiar, well, that's because it is. Back in 2021, similar conditions triggered mass protests across Iran. Today, a new wave of unrest does appear to be building, led this time by residents, farmers, and business owners who say they've been pushed to the brink by dry taps and flickering lights. According to the Jerusalem Post, demonstrations are flaring up in multiple cities. Now, whether this translates into political upheaval remains to be seen. The absence of a unified opposition makes regime change unlikely, but the water crisis is clearly widening the cracks in the Islamic Republic's foundations. If left unchecked, well, it could trigger a broader wave of dissent. In Washington, analysts argue that the U.S. should seize the moment. A researcher at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington-based think tank, called it a rare opportunity to, quote, demonstrate alignment with the Iranian people via aid against a government that has made large swaths of the country increasingly uninhabitable. All right, coming up next in the back of the brief, a Long Beach, California man is behind bars now, accused of wiring cash to ISIS. We'll break down the charges when we come back. Stay with us. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, let me take just a moment of your time to talk about protecting your hard-earned assets. You've probably noticed, I suspect, a little turmoil out there in the economy, right? Trade wars, a Federal Reserve that seems to be at odds with the White House, uncertainty over employment numbers, a volatile stock market. Well, you get the picture. Now, at times like these, it's important to think about your assets and how to protect them. And one way to do that is through diversification. And I'm here to suggest that you consider diversifying with gold through the Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold's been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, global uncertainty, and high inflation. And Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you have an IRA or an old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Or, like a lot of folks, you can just buy gold to store safely at home. First, get yourself educated. Birch Gold will send you a free information kit on gold. No obligation. Just text PDB to the number 989-898. Again, text PDB to 989-898. Consider diversifying a portion of your savings into gold with the Birch Gold Group. Again, text PDB to 989-898. In today's back of the brief, federal agents on Friday arrested a Long Beach, California man accused of wiring funds to ISIS and pledging allegiance to the terror group in an act the FBI described as a clear threat to national security. According to the Justice Department, 28-year-old Mark Lorenzo Villanueva, a permanent U.S. resident originally from the Philippines, now faces up to 20 years in federal prison for attempting to provide material support to the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or better known as ISIS. Prosecutors say Villanueva had been chatting with self-identified ISIS fighters on social media earlier this year. In those exchanges, he didn't just express ideological sympathy, he offered to bankroll their efforts and said he hoped to join them in combat. Yeah, those are all pretty good clues. One of the messages Villanueva wrote read, quote, "It's an honor to fight and die for our faith. It's the best way to go to heaven. Someday soon, I'll be joining," end quote. Over the course of 5 months, he allegedly sent 12 payments, totaling more than $1,600 to 2 intermediaries overseas. The transfers were flagged in Western Union records, cited in the DOJ's complaint. And when FBI agents raided his Long Beach home, well, they say they discovered what appeared to be a homemade bomb in his bedroom. The Bureau later posted photos of the device on Facebook and X, suggesting there may have been more than just talk in the works. The acting assistant director in charge of the FBI's Los Angeles field office said, quote, "Mr. Villanueva is alleged to have financially supported and pledged his allegiance to a terror group that targets the U.S. and our interests around the world," end quote. Now, his arrest is the latest in a string of domestic terrorism cases tied to ISIS sympathizers, and the details echo a disturbingly similar case from just earlier this year. Back in March, federal agents arrested a 19-year-old former member of the Michigan Army National Guard for plotting a mass shooting at a U.S. military base. He was reportedly acting on behalf of ISIS. He was apprehended on the day of the planned attack, shortly after launching a drone near the Army Tank Automotive and Armaments Command in suburban Detroit. That's a facility that oversees the Army's tank supply chain. Federal officials say both cases reflect a persistent threat posed by individuals radicalized by ISIS ideology online, quietly moving from extremist rhetoric to operational intent inside U.S. borders. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, the 4th of August. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And to listen to the show ad-free, well, you can do that, and you can do it very simply. Just become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. And I hope you had a chance to catch our latest episode of the PDB Situation Report. That, of course, is our extended weekend show. If not, you can find it on our YouTube channel at President's Daily Brief and on podcast platforms wherever you get your podcast stuff. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me ask you an intriguing question. Now, what if you could delay your next 2 mortgage payments? Right? I told you it was intriguing. It's right. Imagine putting those 2 payments in your pocket and finally getting a little breathing room. Well, it is possible when you call American Financing today. Look, if you're feeling stretched by everyday expenses, you know what I'm talking about. Gas bills, auto bills, utility bills, grocery bills. Well, you're not alone. Many Americans are putting these expenses on their credit cards, and for many of them, they don't seem to see a way out. Now, American Financing can show you how to use your home's equity to pay off that debt. So give American Financing a call today to see what your options are. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are helping homeowners just like you restructure their loans and consolidate debt, all without upfront fees. That's very important. And their customers are saving an average of $800 a month. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but that's something like a $10,000 raise. It's fast, it's simple, and it could save your budget. Call now, 866-885-1881. That's 866-885-1881. Or visit AmericanFinancing.net/PDB.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.